Welcome everybody to CTN Live. Our first presentation this morning is Director Brian Mainolfi. Brian, you're up.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining me this morning and this inauguration of CTN 2020. First of all, I just want to give a big thanks to everyone at CTN, Tina Price, and all the people who've been working tirelessly behind the scenes to pull off continuing doing a CTN with everything going on in the world. I appreciate it very much that CTN works tirelessly to bring the animation community together. And I'm so glad that we're still able to do it this year. So first of all, big old thank you to everybody working on CTN. Everybody, my name is Brian Mainolfi. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be going over some storyboard submissions, and I'll be going over some storyboarding tips and tricks and things to improve how you do your work to get into the Hollywood system. A little bit about me. Again, my name is Brian. I started working as a professional animator 28 years ago. I went to the Baltimore School for the Arts as a visual arts student and received a full conservatory visual arts education. And then from there moved on to NYU Film School, where I received my animation education under John Canemaker, who's written so many wonderful history of animation books and has won an Oscar for his work. Immediately upon graduation, I was selected to be the assistant to legendary animation director Chuck Jones. I was given a few days to pack all my stuff and move from New York to Hollywood, where I started working with Chuck Jones and Maurice Noble on what would become their last Coyote Roadrunner cartoon. From there, I moved on to Walt Disney Feature Animation, where I worked on a number of films there, Pocahontas and Mulan and Hercules, and all the way through Treasure Planet. I worked at DreamWorks and Universal and some other features until features became fully CG. I just want to draw, so I moved over to television. And for decades now, I've been working on a number of TV shows, from The Simpsons, The Boondocks, Dan Versus, for Seth MacFarlane on American Dad. I am directing on the Netflix Paradise PD. I did the pilot for Duncanville on Fox, and I'm currently helping out a Fox show while I wait next month, where I'm going back to Netflix to direct the pilot for a new series. So right now, that's about me, what I've been doing. A couple of weeks ago, I asked the CTN community if they would submit storyboards that they're working on, and I would go over them live and anonymously. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, just to give some tips, tricks, how we do it here in Hollywood. Now, there's many ways to do animation, and if you want to create your own short by your own rules, that's fine. God bless you. That's a great way to go. I am somebody who has spent my entire career working within the Hollywood machine. And so I get assignments, television shows, and then I make them work and get them to air. If you want to work in that Hollywood system, there are a number of specific rules that you have to follow. And again, in animation, you can do your own thing, that's fine. There's wonderful animators who lock themselves in a room for several years and create wonderful animated shorts. But specifically what I do is collect a paycheck within the Hollywood system doing Hollywood shows. And so that's the angle that I'm going to come from. And so when I evaluate the storyboard submissions that I received, I'm going to be talking a lot about what you should do and what you must do. And again, these are the rules that are necessary to make it within the Hollywood system. And if you want to do tests and work to get yourself into Hollywood and work on big shows, hopefully these hints are going to help you a lot and know what to do. the first thing I want to say is that of the submissions that I received, many of them or all of them didn't necessarily fit a specific Hollywood mold. And again, Hollywood is really about being as creative as possible in this very small box of what Hollywood allows to be able to monetize entertainment. And so I'm going to share my screen here and go over some of these rules with you. What Hollywood does is there is, of course, feature film and television is the big category split, and each requires a different and specific set of rules for the way they do storyboards. We're not going to worry about feature storyboards today. We're going to worry about television. Within television, there are 3 specific types of shows that are done. Prime time is where I have predominantly worked, that is shows that air later at night, such as The Simpsons, Duncanville, Family Guy. And they are very specific towards landing the jokes. The writer writes the jokes, and then it's up to us to do all the drawings and the timing and the acting that sells those jokes as effectively as possible. There are their action shows that air primarily in the afternoon, stuff like Justice League and Avatar, where you don't get as much time to work on the acting. And so instead of acting, what you're doing is you're worrying about the pacing and the composition to reveal what the characters are going through. And then lastly, we have premise shows. This is what we in the industry call kid shows, stuff like Craig of the Creek or We Bare Bears, where you are writing the show as well as drawing it. And so as a storyboard artist, you are coming up with, you get a premise, which is, oh, the bears have to go on this hike and they lose something. And then you have to write all the dialogue and action and plot everything out in your storyboard as well. I have not done a show like that. I personally think that's one of the hardest jobs in Hollywood. And there's so many wonderful people who do them so well here. Now, those are the specific types of television that is done in Hollywood. And the submissions I receive don't necessarily fit into those types. So I'm going to be evaluating them in a number of different ways, mostly from my primetime perspective, but also with a sense of action and premise as well for how these shows go. So I'm going to start now with our first submission, and I'll take you through it real fast. I have taken the liberty, some of these came in with dozens upon dozens of storyboards. So in order to make this work, I have taken the liberty of removing some of the panels that showed some of the detailed acting or stuff that wasn't necessary for what I'm going to be talking about. So what we have in this submission is 2 female friends who are talking in a cafe. They also have their phones out. You can see that there is dialogue going on, but I can't make out what that dialogue is saying. So the dialogue is going to be unimportant for our purposes, because what we're talking about is shot selection, drawing, and acting. And that, whatever is happening, should be able to come through without the dialogue. If you're completely relying solely on dialogue, then just write a script. But what we're going to do here is figure out what's going on and what can be made better without knowing specifically what the dialogue is. So we have the friends are talking together. It looks like she grabs her friend at one point, and her friend says something down here on the next panel. The friend responds up top, and then we see an angle on the 2 friends on the bottom level. And then we cut to this guy down here. Sorry, there we go. This guy down here who is behind the counter, who I assume is the cute guy they're talking about. And at the end, they turn and see him from far away. So let's go back to the beginning and talk about some of the things that are going on right here. First of all, a big part of what I want to talk about is don't distract. You can see this character here on the bottom who's taking up just off center of the frame, but there is a lot of action and a lot of perspective happening in this background. What this tends to do is split your focus between the character and the background because there's so much in this frame to look at. And so I'm going to suggest that we find a way to focus on the character without having so much background. I'm going to show you that in a second. Another thing in this second panel is that we have the character pretty much dead center, and then we have all the perspective also coming dead center, and just everything is pointing towards the center of the frame. And what happens is it can get very boring at the beginning when this goes on through multiple things to have everything so focused just to the center of the frame. More on that in a second. First, what I'm going to do is show you that this frame up top here, what exactly, without knowing the dialogue, what exactly are these characters doing? She has her arm up to her face, so I assume that she's holding a phone while she is grabbing her friend's coat over here. So I did a little mock-up here of a way that this could be done better. By switching the phone to her other hand, now we get to see that she's on the phone. And we get a very clear grabbing of the coat with the other hand because the arm doesn't have to cross the body, cutting off what's happening on the far side. What is going on here is that we can very clearly see from her body position that one arm is grabbing, one arm's on the phone, and we're able to see everything nice and clearly. So this becomes very important to us when staging our characters, the clarity of their pose, because their pose is telling us what's going on with them. Also now, you see that the other character's phone is being held down low here. So if we do this and raise that arm up, we still get to see what this character on this side is doing with her phone and the other here. So again, we're talking about the clarity that's going on between this pose and maybe something a little clearer where every aspect of what's happening with the characters can be seen. I was talking a moment ago about the scene on the bottom and how the perspective and character all goes to the center. When we do the reverse shot to the friend, we get a little bit of the same. We have this big background that's sort of going off into infinity. We're not exactly sure where they are in the room or how big the room is right now. So I've done this, put these two panels together so you can see when we're cutting back and forth between this shot and this shot. If we instead focus the characters this way. So what we've essentially done is lower the horizon line so that what we're seeing is looking slightly up at the characters and getting the ceiling in the view instead of all that stuff going on in the background. It makes the character front and center. We still get a sense of where they are in the room, but all the details have fallen away, so it's not so busy and distracting for being able to focus just on what the characters are doing. Also, by having the perspective shown on this side and on this side with our angles, what it does is create it so that it looks like we are a character in the center, looking back and forth between the two friends. This involves us more in the storytelling, to be able to have the perspective for the two of them, look back and forth, and then we also get to feel a little more intimate with the way the characters are relating to each other in their space. Now, the big thing that happens between these shots, because we do go from this shot to this shot to this shot third. And what happens is we call a breaking of the 180. The 180 rule means that when you set up two characters to be talking, the camera can be placed on one side of them, shooting down this imaginary line between them. And you can put the camera at any place on this side of the line. But if you cross over and put your camera on the other side, the characters seem to switch places from left to right. And that's what's happening here, is that we have this character who's looking at her friend to the right, and this character who's looking at her friend to the left. And then suddenly, in the next shot, she's looking to the right, and she's looking to the left, which reverses their positions relative to each other. When this happens on screen, it can be very disconcerting because all of a sudden everything has flip-flopped. And we try not to do it unless there's a very specific reason to break the 180. It completely takes you out of what's going on. So again, these are the shots where if she's looking at her friend one way and then she is suddenly looking the opposite way to get to her friend. So we want to avoid that. It's called breaking the 180. In the next series, so we still have this shot going on, and then we see the guy that they are looking at. And I realized as we went further on that they were looking at him and he was between them this way. So what was happening, it looks like this artist was, first of all, they're working on a front, a linear back and forth. This is the guy behind the counter. These are the friends down here. And so we're working on a very linear path back and forth to the camera shooting. It's usually not the way television is done. Television is usually done shooting at angles from one side to be able to see how everyone relates to each other. This was originally done with old sitcoms when they were first produced. You had a stage where the sitcom actors were, and then the audience is sitting out here, and the cameras are shooting the actors in the stage. And so what happens is we have these angles that we're used to the characters being shot at. And this is what we're used to seeing in television, not so linear. But what's happening here, I realize why this artist broke the 180 at this point, is that we are suddenly seeing these friends from the perspective of the guy behind the counter, but we haven't seen the guy behind the counter yet. And so we don't understand whose point of view we're looking at before we've seen this guy. So the thing would be to either introduce the guy earlier and show his point of view, or especially here, just not to break the 180 before we see what they're even looking at, which is this guy. And then once we do finally see the guy, which is in this very last panel, you can see that it's just very hard to see what they're looking at. This is the first time we've seen them, the friends, and the guy together, but he's so damn small, we can't really see what's going on. So I did this panel below here to show this would be a better composition where it shows clearly what they're looking at, and we can see what they're looking at much better than this up here. So clarity, making sure the audience is always brought along and understands immediately what's going on, is a hallmark of telling your story. You want the audience to never be lost, because the moment the audience says, wait, why did they switch positions? Wait, why, who is that person now? You lose the audience and it becomes so hard to get them back again once they start questioning what's going on. Another thing with the perspective being used in the background here, you'll see that based on the way the perspective is going. There's a horizon line that's set at the character's eye line. Generally speaking, television is never shot at a character's eye line. The horizon, the point of view is never at a character's eye line. And that is because the television cameras, from the time they were invented till now, have an operator who is looking eye line, but the lens of the camera is coming forth at mid-chest line. This was done from the very first because this is where the film used to go, where the videotape used to go, or now where the recording goes. And so that has to be closed from light to light at one end, so you can't have an opening for the person to look through here. So what happens, there's a prism that splits the light between the film or tape or now digital and one that shoots up so that the camera operator can see. Because of that, all television that you've ever seen has been shot on a mid-chest. And this, the characters from Paradise PD, and I'm just showing, this is the horizon line that is always used to set the characters in whenever we're building the space for them. And so this just ends up looking higher than we're used to seeing characters. And so it's very important to understand that every television show you've ever seen has this mid-chest point of view, and it makes the audience more comfortable if we keep that point of view. This is another way of summarizing flat and boring compositions that are even and symmetrical or have a completely flat background line behind them. And what is necessary, this is what we do in Hollywood to make sure that what we're seeing is the most top-notch, creative, dynamic, engaging type of entertainment that we can possibly do. And honestly, it makes your storyboards using dynamic angles, using creative compositions. It's what separates you from the minor leagues to the major leagues. And that's what, if you want to work in Hollywood, these are the things that give you that 90-mile-an-hour fastball that get you into the major leagues. Very quickly, do we have, Bruce, any questions specifically about what I've just gone over before I move on to the next submission?
No, actually, I posted that questions can be asked, but so far no questions. So let's move on.
Wonderful. All right, here is the second submission. And this one has some very nice elements about it, I must say. In so much as that, because I could clearly see the dialogue, it seemed to be a conversation between this woman and a turtle creature friend about her internal struggle and what's going on. And while generally speaking, in primetime television and premise television, we're not really dealing with deep conversations like this, I think it's interesting that this person attempted it. And we're going to go through some things that are going to help emphasize this. So once the turtle's questioning the friend and the friend starts to open up, we have this interesting and dynamic shot as she starts to talk about what she's struggling with. And the turtle questions it, and she goes a little more back into what she's dealt with and some more dynamic shots at the end. So these are more dynamic, but let's go back and try and go through some of the stuff that's happening here. This is not the first panel. I chose a section in the middle, so there was an establishing shot earlier that showed where the characters are. However, based on what looks to be some sort of crystalline cave that they're sitting in and not being able to see where the characters are sitting, it's a little bit hard to see what where they are in relation to each other and in relation to the space. So I did this draw over to show that if we increase the look of the turtle on the one side and decrease her so we can see her position, that she's in this sort of fetal position a little clearer, we get a little bit of the floor to the space that she's in, helps to ground her on a plane. And now we can theorize that he's sitting where he's sitting in relation to her. And it also helps, we can make sure that the eye line is going clearly from him to her. So again, just by switching it up slightly, we can get a much clearer sense of where we are in relation to each other. In this one, first of all, one of the primary things that I want everybody to take to heart is that when you place a character in the middle of the frame and then cut to another character who's in the middle of the frame, when we see that instantaneously happen in television, it looks as if the one character has suddenly popped and transformed into another, especially if the backgrounds are similar as well. So once again, what we want to do is never go from dead center to dead center in a cut. So what you want to do is generally put the character slightly one way, looking that way, and this character slightly off center. So if we have the center, the character on the right is taking a little more of the right space, and the character on the left is taking a little more of the left space. And that way, when it cuts, there's a shift between the two characters, and we get the sense that one character is on one side of the room, one character is on the other side of the room, and we are between them looking at them. Also, it was noted in this that she brings her legs close to her chest, fetal position, but there simply isn't enough of her scene to be able to have that read clearly. So I did this draw over, sort of show a way that with her facing slightly away from the character but turned to be able to talk to him, this way it gives us a much clearer sense of her position, and the physicality of her taking that position is going to speak volumes to us about her inner struggle. And so we want to be able to see that very clearly. Like I said, this was a beautiful shot, a nice dynamic shot for the character. One suggestion, she's talking about something that she really struggled to work on. And so this was just a quick suggestion. If you have the technical capabilities with whatever program you're using, I redid this shot this way with a slight drift on it, because at a moment when the character's talking about, in high school, I was really struggling with work. In high school, I was really struggling with work. The slight ethereal drift really helps to set the scene apart and make us pay extra special attention to it. And it gives us a connection with the character a little more. So there's lots of filmmaking tricks that you can use to make sure that you are engaging with the audience. So please use every single one of them. And then this one again is what happens immediately after, and it is again this center to center cut that pops very oddly if you do it on television. So always push a character one side to the frame or the other. I'm going to talk about backgrounds as well in a moment. I see this sort of crystalline cave that was done, but I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Come back right after I finish with the storyboards. So here we have three dynamic angles that end this part, this section, where the character is talking about how her mom knows how to pull the strings to take something from you. But over time, she bonded and helped improve myself as a person. The angles here are dynamically chosen and very important, because angles in television and film They give you the directing of the moment tells you something about what's happening with the character. I have a few examples here. So for instance, in The Simpsons, if we want to make someone as powerful as Montgomery Burns seem small and troubled or insignificant, we can do this high shot from the ceiling that makes him small in the frame, makes him insignificant to what else is happening. If we want Burns to appear domineering and in charge of the situation, then we shoot up at him and from close to make him big and powerful. So what are we saying with these shots, and which one should we do? If in reviewing this, here when the character talks about that the mom knows what strings to pull, that must make you as a person, have your mother doing that, feel insignificant. So this shot would be much better, this high up where we're looking down at the character. We as the viewer are in control and dominating on top of this character. To say, my mom knows what strings to pull, makes this character seem like they are unable to fight back. But when she talks about what improved her as a person, to improve you as a person, this goes much better over the last shot, because now we're looking up at the character, looking up at the sky. The character's closer, bigger. It seems more in control because we as a viewer are below the character's eye line. So by simply moving the dialogue to the next shot, you're going to end up where the composition of the shot is reinforcing the dialogue and is going to make us feel for this character much stronger. And then the last thing I want to say about this is the backgrounds. Attention has been paid to the shots and how they're going. To this artist, I would say, take a landscape class or a perspective classes and how to draw cities and landscapes and everything, because the background can be, and the composition of the background can be as important to telling you about the character as what the characters are doing. These are some backgrounds that I storyboarded, and I'm not a great background guy, but as a storyboard artist, it is incumbent upon you to not just choose the shots and not just draw the characters. You're in charge of the acting. You're in charge of the overall compositions of the backgrounds, how everything looks. And the better you can draw and the better you can compose, the better you're going to be able to describe exactly the kind of feeling that you want. In this drawing, for example, this is an alien who lives in a discarded shipping container. And so I have elements here that will show that this is some sort of old shipping container. But I've also shown these ragged pieces of cloth that she would have scavenged from somewhere and hung to try and make it a little more homey. And I added a few sort of wacky flowers and flower pots to remind you that it's an alien. And so you're thinking about what goes into the background, how would this character live in it, and then designing a background that will allow a character to walk straight in from the door and sit on the edge of the bed, which is what has to happen in this shot. And just feels dimensional, real, and something. And then the background designer will go and design something that's much nicer, because background designers are fantastic. But you want to give, as a storyboard artist, you want to give enough information that the background artist only has to enhance it from there. This is another one that I did, and it can be simple, but the idea with this background is that we were showing that the characters had gone down a ravine to find this clue that they were looking for. And so I designed this ravine in the distance, and then we pan over and see where the characters are, as a way to not have to storyboard them climbing down a ravine or doing anything like that. And then this is just another one. They don't have to be super detailed. They don't have to be super clean or all that, but they should have clarity. They should show exactly and define the space in a way that everybody knows what you're going to be working on moving forward. And also, this is some poses I did from an American Dad episode where he has to throw a hook shot basketball. I think this bit lasts 2 seconds. And I've done 10 poses, which means that this is pretty much animating on 4s. But don't be afraid to draw lots of poses, everything necessary to fully describe what you need to show. So for instance, where his knee comes up, which foot touches down first, the fact that he's following the ball, how the ball bounces on the ground and then goes back up to him being caught again. So all of this is important if you want the action in your final, you're going to have to draw it. Don't be afraid to do tons and tons of drawing in order to fully get across your vision and what you need for the storyboard. Lots of drawing, lots of work. Storyboarding is fantastic, and it's difficult because there's so much that goes into it. You are in charge of the pacing, the acting, the compositions, the shot selections. And so learn everything you can about film language, about perspective, about acting, about all these things that you will have to know in order to keep going as a storyboard artist. I took a little bit too long on that one, but let me ask real quick if there are any specific questions before I move on to the next.
Yes, there is from Kevin. Hi, Brian. I have a question. When designing the backgrounds and storyboards, are you already working with the background designer, or do they just work off what you made in the storyboards?
Oh, good question. It varies from production to production. Generally, if a production is running smoothly, a background designer, it all starts with a script. The script will say, this alien lives in a shipping container. And if there's enough time, the background designers will do some pre-visualization to maybe sketch out what they think that might look like. That may or may not be useful for the shots you need to use as a storyboard artist. If you're lucky, you'll get something that will help you figure out your space, your angles, and help you visualize it a little better. Usually these are wonderfully done scribbles from excellent background designers. Often you do not get that. And so often it will be up to you to decide, generally speaking, what that background has to be. And so there's so many limitations. Generally, if you do have a background artist doing previs for you, they're only going to be able to do 5 or 8 backgrounds before you get started. So you're not going to get everything. As always in this industry, the answer is it depends, but be prepared to be able to at least rough out. And even if it means setting in your general perspective lines and where you want a building to fall or a tree to fall to sort of frame the character. As with any visual art, it's not simply about drawing the character when you're a storyboard artist. You are in charge of deciding the backgrounds, deciding the shots, laying in the perspective. It is for you to decide, and then everyone else has to fill in the final beautiful drawings for you. And so as a storyboard artist, it is only to your advantage to be able to show and express as much of your vision as possible. So I'm going to go over one more, I think, as quick as possible. And then see if we have any final questions before the end. This one I liked a lot. Now let's go over, first of all, what we're seeing here in this story. It looks like at the start, there's a rooster sitting on a fence, and then the sun comes up, the rooster crows, and then something hits the rooster. There is a cut to, let me just put a layer up here. Generally, if you don't know this, this little triangle symbol that you put delineates an edit. So if you're just laying out a whole bunch of thumbnails like this, if you put a little upside down triangle like that, that will delineate this is where there is an edit. So it looks like the rooster is on the ground here, and then a girl on her bicycle rides by. And then we see that she is throwing newspapers. We cut to a bird bath. She rides by again from right to left and throws a newspaper into the bird bath. There's an edit to get a little closer so we can see the newspaper land in the bird bath. And then we see a guy sitting on his porch. Once again, she rides by right to left. Well, I'll assume that she throws a newspaper. We see it bounce, hit the guy in the head, ricochet off a trash can, off a mailbox, off a weather vane, hits her in the head, disappears, gets smaller here. I'm not sure what we're looking at, if that's probably the sky. She looks up to see the newspaper, gets off of her bicycle, and the newspaper falls into behind a fence. The guy tells her to go get it. She comes around the corner, goes over to the gate and sees the sign, "Keep out," peers through the gate and sees what looks like sort of a mean haunted house. It goes on from there with these cute drawings, but let's go back to the beginning and sort of clarify the language and how this is moving. So I've done some little drawovers here. Let's start with, I would say, because this is the first shot, let's start with something that's just more interesting and exciting to look at, a little more inventive to draw us in right away. Let's put the rooster's head silhouetted against the sun. So that he crows, and even if it's dead center, because this is our beginning thing, often a establishing shot or something can be symmetrical at the very beginning, or dead center, because it's going to draw us into the story. Then the shot, as it is with the fence down here and the rooster, is very similar to the second shot where we have the fence and the rooster. So I think what I would suggest is that if we start this shot on the angle with the rooster a little more clearly seen between the slats, and then we pan with the girl riding her bicycle into the distance, more like this shot here. And the reason is, physically, when this happens on screen and she rides her bike linearly straight from right to left, she is, honestly, she's going to be in frame for less than a second. And so there's just not a lot of time to be able to see her or understand what's going on. But this shot, where she is receding in perspective, means that she's going to physically be on screen longer. This shot can last 2 or 3 seconds, and we get a very clear understanding of who she is and what she's doing. So combining those shots by having her enter frame and we pan over slightly to follow her, we can go from the rooster, understand why he was hit, and we get to follow her for several seconds now, which gives us time as the audience to absorb, oh, it's a girl on her bicycle, she's throwing newspapers. Now I understand what just happened to the rooster, and I understand what's going on moving forward. This shot of the bird bath, I would very much suggest putting a house behind the bird bath, because otherwise it's not exactly clear. She would have to be really bad at her job to deliberately throw a newspaper into a bird bath in the middle of a park or in some greens. But if we see that she was maybe aiming for the front porch and missed it, makes a lot more sense. So we'll add a house behind that bird bath. And you can also, again, in order to get her on screen for a longer amount of time, rather than just going through on the static shot, we can start with her in frame bicycling and pan the background behind her, and then stopping at the bird bath, and then she leaves frame. And all that does is it gets us to see her more. And now we know who our main character is going to be. We can relate to her a little better rather than her just zipping through frame in less than a second each time. Also, I would suggest at some point adding a close-up of her riding the bicycle. There's not a single close-up of her yet. And if she's going to be our character, we want the audience to relate with her. And the way we do that is by showing the audience who our character is. As we move on to the second page here, once again, she is going simply from right to left and through the shot as fast as possible. But if we get her moved as she's leaving frame here, to have her arm throw the newspaper out at the guy, we want to be able to see her throw a newspaper and then see what that newspaper does. If you don't show her throw it, we can assume that she threw another newspaper, but it's always best to show it, because film in general is a passive medium. We're only going to understand what that storyboard artist or director chooses to show you. And if she does indeed, because if she throws the newspaper when she's just entering frame this way, then the newspaper is going to be thrown as she's only entered the screen for a few seconds. Sorry, a few frames. So before we even get a good chance to see her, she's doing something. So it'd be much smarter to have her ride through the frame and then throw the newspaper from this way backwards. And already we have some screen direction issues where if the newspaper is bouncing off from right to left, and then the very next shot, we see it come in from left to right, there's an issue about what's going on with the newspaper. So if I were directing this, I would tell the storyboard artist to simply cut this first shot. So as she throws it from left to right, it will come in from left to right, bounce off his head. This screen direction is good. This screen direction is good. From here, bounces off her head. And then this shot here, again, where I just wasn't sure what was happening in these three shots, what I was looking at spatially. If we go ahead and add, say, some houses at the bottom, street light, maybe some trees, some clouds up in the sky, we're certain that as that newspaper recedes, it is flying away into space, into the sky, to the next house or building. So a little more clarification there will very much help us to understand where that newspaper is going in that shot. We see her stop her bicycle here. So for her to stop, or even if this is a static shot of her looking up, it's going to have to be on frame for at least a second and a half for us to understand what's going on. Then if we were to have her get off and walk away, we're talking about 3 to 4 seconds of this shot. And by the time we cut, that newspaper is still in the air. So it's just going to be a little odd if the newspaper were flying through all of this into the air, and she gets off her bicycle and is still airborne. So I'm going to say it's going to be fine to leave her on her bike, and then here just cut these two shots all together. So she was on her bike, and then we see this next shot. Instead of starting with the guy looking at his newspaper, I'm going to suggest that we go from that newspaper flying, and then we pan down from it landing behind the fence to the girl who could still be on her bike below frame, and the sign that says keep out. This way we know immediately what her problem is going to be. That rather than saying, oh, it's behind a fence, the guy tells her to go get her. Well, yeah, she threw it behind someone else's fence. She should go get it. Now we're presented with a dilemma right away, which is that she knows she's not supposed to go in there. And when he comes into frame, we get this shot. This is what I call the storytelling pose. The storytelling pose is generally a way that you start in crafting a sequence to, in one pose, tell what's going to happen. And then you want to storyboard your way into that shot and out of that shot. This is the storytelling pose for me. It would be her on one side, the guy on the other side telling go get it, and the keep out sign right between them to show what the dilemma is. This sums up your entire story. And if you're doing a short, you can use this panel as to publicize your short, tell people what it's going to be about. This is something that we would use for advertisements or so on to show what your characters are going through. So this is the storytelling shot, and it says keep out. So now we know immediately what the problem is going to be. And because she was on her bike, if we do this shot right here as the fence and the sidewalk, there's a mailbox there. And if we do this shot by itself without the girl in it, and then she steps around from behind the fence and comes this way. Because we have had this shot without the character in it, even for a few frames, this is some cinema magic. When she appears, we can theorize that she got off her bike. And it's only through not showing the character, not cutting to character for a moment. When the character's off screen, the character can do stuff, and we accept that we just didn't see her do it. And so as long as you have a few frames before you see her, we get the idea that she came off of her bike and is now going around the fence. And so we don't necessarily need to see her getting off her bike in that part. Now, for the rest of this sequence, which I'm running out of time, so the thing that I just wanted to talk about is a lot of these shots are just dead on center, dead on center, dead on center, dead on center. And so there's just not a lot of variety of shots. And I went and I remembered that there was a Simpsons episode where they have to retrieve something from a house much like this. So I went and I looked it up, and you saw that you see the thing up on the roof, and then it pans down to see the kids. And I noticed there's a no trespassing sign, which is just like what I suggested of keeping that keep out there with the character, so we get the dilemma right away. But there's also a great variety of shots, them behind bars, because that shows how disconnected they are. It's not shot from their perspective necessarily, but with the bars in front of them, we see what the obstacle is. Dramatic up shots and down shots as the character figured out. And then when she meets the character, we get this very dramatic up shot of that character that's just awesome and makes the character big and looming over them. And so variety of shots are very important to keeping the audience engaged and telling a story that has more drama and dynamics to it is what we're going for. If everything is straight on and even, it tends to be a little humdrum. And the Hollywood way of doing these things is big and crazy. So I know I have thrown a tremendous amount of information at you very quick. I want to, first of all, make sure I thank everybody who submitted. I hope that you keep drawing and keep working and keep putting your stories out there, and find books on cinema language, how different shots affect us emotionally, how composition affects us emotionally, because they're all parts of this wonderful toolbox that you get to use when you're telling your stories. Bruce, do we have time for some questions?
Yes, we do. Can you hear me okay, Brian, to making sure?
Yes, sounds great.
Okay. Let's see here. I have one from Piper. Piper says, do you keep the same level of detail in the backgrounds throughout the entire board, or is it mainly the establishing shot, the one given the most information about the setting?
Yes, if you can do a nice establishing shot, then you can certainly get away. Let me share my screen real quick. You can certainly get away with, say this is a shot, and we have our character, and we want the character's emotion. So let's say I had time to do a very emotional looking character right there. And if we just do this to show where they are in the room, that's enough for the background artist to go and create all the shots based on the establishing that they need to know. One thing I would also always recommend too is that if you have a room and let's say you know that there's a lot of pictures on the wall and you have your character and you know here's your character and you know that there's lots of pictures on the wall and you are going to draw the background. Don't draw the background so that the picture sort of overlaps their face a little bit, because there's going to be stuff in this picture and it's going to be right in front of their eyes. I would very much say that you want to compose your shots so that if a character is talking, you want the picture to be behind them, say, so that there's empty space in front of their eyes. It just makes the character seem clear, read better. So composition is always very important. And if you're given an established room to work in, you also want to be thinking about what in the background might be conflicting with keeping our interest on the character. So the backgrounds do not have to be cleaned up beautifully, but they should be clear. Clarity is what we're going for. If we have a moment, I think I've got a section from American Dad, and this should be very clear. I'm sorry, very short. I just want to go over, trying to make it big. There we go. I'm going to share this and play it real fast. And hopefully this will show you a sequence I did years ago. It's pretty quick, but it'll show you the level at which you want to operate to be in the Hollywood system for sure.
I feel badass.
Yeah, this feels more serious now that we're wearing these bathrobes.
200 thread count Egyptian cotton, the baddest of all fabrics. Now face off!
Mr. Sensei Tom, are you sure you want us fighting this soon? We haven't been taught any moves yet.
I need to see how you handle combat before I can begin training you.
And there's probably a better matchup because we're both here for self-defense, so we're not really into attacking per se.
Punch!
Ah! My shoulder! Why did you do that?
Steve, I'm so sorry.
Don't apologize. Your dad didn't apologize for dying. Your jacket didn't apologize for not having sleeves.
It's a vest.
Use your anger. Attack! Attack!
Whoa. What did I just do?
Congratulations. You've unlocked your anger. You're one of us now. In the words of Vice President Joe Biden, you do not have permission to use my name on your dojo.
Sleeveless, 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 sleeveless.
And so I use that as an example to show you that not all of the backgrounds have to be super cleaned up. I didn't start with an establishing shot. I used the establishing shot as the second shot, but I still want to show where everyone is in the room. I made sure that I saved the close-ups for dramatic moments because close-ups feel more important. And so most of the shots have multiple characters in them, but then we save the close-ups for the stuff that we want the audience to really remember. And lots and lots of drawings in order to get the full point across and the jokes to hit properly. So that's sort of the level at which you'll want to operate in the Hollywood system.
Well, Brian, you are about 2 seconds away from an exactly 1 hour. I know you have to go to work soon, so I just wanted to mention to everyone that was watching this that You have about 30 seconds to click the file button at the very bottom of the chat, and you can save the chat, which has a lot of great links to CNN and other videos and all the information about CTN Live coming up this week. There are lots of great programs coming up. So let's collectively clap your hands for Matt, even though, excuse me, for Brian, even though he doesn't know you're clapping. And thank you very much. I'll give you about 30 more seconds, and then we're going to move on to the next program. And again, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy.